See you here. Welcome aboard. Alluring, really. And cracking open the spine of a new book or taking in the smell of history while gingerly turning the pages of an archival antiquity. The pandemic seems to have pushed book production and readership across the globe. A very good evening to you all. Many of you are our regular friends and attendees to the monthly literary event, which has become a tradition we all look greatly forward to. On behalf of the Bengal Club, our president of the club, Mr. Ambarish Dasgupta, whose support of my concept of the book club now on its 18th month has been unstinting. And on behalf of Dr. Shundeep Chatterjee, the erudite, empathetic chair of our library subcommittee, an old friend, as well as the incoming president, Mr. Kunal Sen, immensely proactive and with us also today, and all my colleagues at the library subcommittee, I'm enormously happy to welcome you to the party this evening that is quite unique. 5 of our very own Bengal Club members who are on the panel today, Dr. Sanjukta Dasgupta, Dr. Shumita Banerjee, Dr. Pradeep Kakkar, Ms. Bonani Kakkar, and Dr. Paramita Mukherjee Malik are our honored authors who are renowned in their own right. None has had to give up their day jobs to write them. Of our many published authors, we have selected these 5, a difficult decision, because they have been published within the last 6 months. The pandemic has lit some spectacularly creative sparks. And so we are here today with all of our regular, devoted, feisty book club members and a new scholar as well. And our friends from Toronto to Florida to Hyderabad to Bangalore to our maximum city of joy who have come together to celebrate the passion of writing and the enterprise of independent publishing. Bookstore sales in 2021, you might be surprised to know, were approximately $9 billion US, up from 6.5 billion in 2020. Ebook revenue was up 11.7% in 2020 over 2019 figures. In October 2021, ebook revenue reached 84 million US dollars. Women account for 80% of fiction sales in the US, UK, and Canada. Today, I think it's not just a celebration of independent writers amongst us, but independent publishers in India too, who are publishing some of the most diverse voices in literature. They're not Penguin, they're not HarperCollins. This is primarily because Penguins and HarperCollins have more capital to work with, allowing them to employ a more extensive workforce. Perhaps also to bigger budgets, better funding. But one example of this intersectionality which has worked between writers and publishers is this clutch of 5 writers we have for you today. Especially Bonani and Pradeep Kakkar's impulse in meticulously writing and researching for Once Upon a City may be distilled into what I might like to call publishing for a cause. But more about that later. I think, Gurudas, this might be a nice intervention with our PowerPoint to quickly introduce our writers to our readers and responders. So here we are. The next slide, please. Okay, so who do we have with us today? We have Pradeep and Bonani Kakkar, who have, as I said, created an archive of sorts for the voice of activism and advocacy for this city. We have the book, Once Upon a City, which I think will become an archive of the battles that have been fought, and some have been alluded of success and some have been successful in keeping the city as pristine as possible. We have Dr. Sanjukta Dasgupta, whose book, It Begins at Home, is rooted in our daily problems with patriarchy, control, domination, and masculinist attitudes that make life somewhat brutal and challenging all across society. It's not just the challenged fiscal people, but it is also across cultures. We have Dr. Paramita Mukherjee Malik, who is a scientist, a geneticist by training, who fell in love with the genre of poetry many, many years ago. And this is the 6th book that we are going to be exploring today, particularly chosen this one, although she's written how many, Paramita? 9 now?
I have written 8 books.
8 books, okay. Yes. So we've chosen The Golden Window because it speaks to the issue of ecology. It speaks to the issue of how nature has become such an important space for us all to go to in these times. And it speaks very loudly to what I think Bonani and Pradeep began their impulse about activism in the city. We have Dr. Shumita Banerjee, who is a historian by training with Chowringhee charms. So let's give you a little vignette of each of these authors before we jump into the discussion. So the next slide, please, Gurudash. Bonani Kakkar founded Public, and Public is a citizen action effort focused on, as I was saying, environmental issues as they affect the city. The overarching goal for Bonani and her partner Pradeep is to promote constructive action by citizens, whether they are individuals, corporates, members of civil society, citizens of the future. Bonani comes with an eminent grounding in public health, none other than the University of California at LA. And before committing herself to Public, she consulted on health projects with the World Bank, UNICEF, connected to the World Life Foundation, and has done enough work to have brought her into the limelight of international bodies and national bodies. She's a Kolkata girl. Pradeep Kakkar is an alumnus of the IIM Kolkata and has a PhD in management from UCLA. He's been on the faculty of Wharton School, the Indian Institute of Management, and Cornell and Columbia universities. He's consulting with the World Bank, the World Food Program, and has done NGO work, consulted with them in various countries. After a spell in the corporate sector with Duncan's and with advertising with Lintas and Clarion, he has, he says, confined himself to public's back office. But dare I say, what I find fascinating is Pradeep and Bonani have both, more Pradeep probably in this aspect. Pradeep has seen the other side as well, being on the corporate side. So I think what comes through in Once Upon a City is that they are very measured, they are very strategic and very careful about the language they use, because the language of activism can cause some trouble and not really fulfill what the goals are. Words, as I remember, someone said, should be weighed and not counted. So in this case, I think they've done well to make sure that the city is protected. And they have inculcated an interest amongst the next generation. Next slide, please, Gurdash. So Dr. Shangjukta Dasgupta is a very, very erudite and a strong presence. Her work in feminism is known pretty much all over the world. She's professor and former head, Department of English, Dean, Faculty of Arts, Calcutta University, and is a poet, short story writer, critic, and translator. Member of the General Council of the Sahitya Academy, New Delhi, and convener, English Advisory Board, Sahitya Academy, New Delhi. She's the president of the Intercultural Poetry and Performance Library, Kolkata. She received the WEI Kamala Das Poetry Award in 2020. 24 published books, poems translated into many languages. And it is an honor for me to be here with Shangjukta Di, because I met her when I first came back from Canada at Srijan and felt an immediate connect and welcome. So welcome to you, Shangjukta Di. Next slide, please. Thank you, thank you. Gurdash, next slide, please. So Dr. Paramita Mukherjee Malik, internationally acclaimed, award-winning poet, began her career as a scientist, educationist, and then she was transformed into a poet when she fell in love with the genre. Sheer love of poetry, she says. As I said, though she's written 8 books, this is the 6th collection that we have chosen. She received the Gold Rose from Argentina for promoting literature and culture in the world. I've been privy to some of her poetry evenings, and I must say that it makes me very proud to share so many of her platforms, because she has that je ne sais quoi that makes her empathetic, compassionate, and wise to a global audience. Her positivity, as you will see when she speaks, is what I think gives us hope in an otherwise rather bleak future. Yes, can we have Shumita Banerjee's slide, please? Thank you. So Dr. Shumita Banerjee, as you can see, we have an illustrious panel today. Dr. Shumita Banerjee is a doctorate in history, an educator trained in psychological counseling. She's been associated with the field of education for many years. Shumita conducts workshops, and she has written for papers, newspapers, magazines, published collections of short stories. This Chaurangi Tales is quite interesting because, again, I think out of 17 short stories, 7 of them are ghost stories. Absolutely alluring, riveting, but not scary. So here again, we have someone who has a great deal of, she's a beacon of light and hope, and you'll hear from her how she imagines the spectral world. So we'll come to that in a minute. Thank you, Gurudash. Excellent. So, social media, online marketing strategies have all proved to be a boon for publishers everywhere. And Urvashi Butalia at one point, I think, of Zuban Publishing says, and I quote, browsing through online spaces also means one can find a lot more books by independent publishers that a physical store may not be able to house. Today, the Indian literary landscape has changed drastically. There is a constantly changing space and interest, a space available for voices that are different, as you will see from our different authors. And people have become extremely interested in feminist-oriented writing as well as Dalit literature, breaking new ground with more and more readers clamoring to read such literature. Translations have also allowed us to experience the richness of our vernacular languages. And I'm not just talking people who are established, such as Mahashweta Devi and Annapurna Devi, Munshi Premchand, but I am also speaking of those writers who are up and coming youngsters. And that is where I think we will move on to our writers today. So perhaps let me turn my attention first to Pradeep and Bonani and open the floor just to give you a heads up how we envisage this evening, which is our usual format. I will ask a question and that will be about 5 writers here, so 5 questions. And then we engage with our responders. And we have some really amazing people here from Dr. Choitali Moitro to our own very own librarian, Shebunti Sengupto, Anusuya Pal, Raka Mukherjee, Vivek Krishna, Dr. Jean Carroll Ewer, Dr. Smita Kothari from Toronto. So you have a heap of people who are waiting to go. So I'll make this very focused and pointed. Which of the battles that you fought were the most memorable ones and why? Pradeep and Bonani.
I think token male on the panel this evening. Let me take the first step and say that the most memorable battle that we fought, well, is not the most important one that I'll let Bonani speak about, but the most memorable one we fought is the one that's most recent, which is pertaining to Roden Square. This is a 3-acre park, which is in one of the central parts of the city and had been shut for 30 years. And it had in fact been shut because our current chief minister had agitated against the proposal of the previous government. And, you know, we had been trying on and off to get it reopened. Finally, because of legal action through the National Green Tribunal, we did manage to get it open, but that was only the first step, as we discovered. And what awaited us after what we thought was a legal victory were the intentions of people within the government in the municipal corporation to, as they say, beautify the park. And that, believe it or not, is a prospect more devastating than a locked park, a park that's been locked for 30 years. To hear about and to read the plans that they had for what they thought was beautification and what was obviously a gravy train that was being created. We really had to use all of Bonani's skills at diplomacy and slight fleet-footed work illegally to overcome that. And to our pride, and I say this with complete honesty, we're really proud of what that park looks like today. You know, if any of you have not seen it, it's a park worth going to simply because it's just an ordinary park. There's no, excuse me, there's no bells and whistles, there's no concrete animals waiting to greet you. There's abundance of open grass. In fact, wild grass grows in the water body, and it's soul satisfying. And that's what, to me, that makes it so memorable.
Yes, Bonani, go ahead.
Julie, I think the most important battle so far has been for me, the East Calcutta wetland, because we were able with a legal action to go against 9 government departments. People like us and our group and public, we had never gone to High Court. So that itself was a unique, and the help that we got from Sudipta Sarkar, who was also the president of Bengal Club, and his chamber. So in 9 months, we were able to win this case. The World Trade Center was to come up there, and this had been promised to an NRI that he could put his World Trade Center. And he said, it all sparked off because this gentleman from Philadelphia, he said that Calcutta is such a dirty, filthy city. He doesn't want the people who come to the World Trade Center to come through the city. So he wanted to place it close to the airport in the wetlands. And that's when he called the city dirty. One other person had done that before, our Prime Minister, Rajiv Gandhi. But we just thought this was enough is enough. And we decided to go to court. And then the victory was 9 months later, we won the battle.
Yes.
And it's now a protected wetlands.
Yes.
It's a Ramsar site, and 12,500 hectares are protected. People nibble a little bit on the sides, but we still get it back.
Fantastic. Congratulations on that. And you're pretty much, both of you, but on the wetlands, Bonani, your name is right up there. You're a star with what you've managed to achieve. Now, my next question is a little facetious, but honestly, it's been so many years that you've got all these stories together. These are not stories of the imagination, which most writers write about, but these are real stories. What I marvel at is, I think I mentioned that in passing, is when I went through the book twice, I found that many of the people that you write about, B.B. Ghosh, for instance, these people, Uncle Kushri Rani, these people were my father's cohort. They were people who were very well known. Never do you use words out of line. Did you, when you wrote this consciously, did you pay attention to that, Bonani and Pradeep? Did you say, no, we have to be careful how we tread? What was the aim of your enterprise when you started?
Actually, the manner in which we speak about the people in the book is exactly the manner in which we think about them, in that there is no, there's no ascription of motive, or there's no rancor about individuals. We simply look at the problem, the individual's role in that problem, and we try to sort things out in a manner that does not in any way attack the person. And I think the tone in the book reflects this completely, that we're not enemies, we're not dealing with adversaries. Even in government, which has been the most frequent opponent for us in the courtroom, even with government, the relationship is a happy one. We are seen as, we think that we are seen as constructive critics. We are seen as people who bring in ideas, who are there to to present counter arguments or new data, and to the extent that is possible, we work together. To the extent it's not possible and we think it's going to hurt the city, we then take it to the next step, which has quite successfully been in the courtroom, thanks to the legal efforts of people who live in the city and who think that, yes, this is something I can do for my city.
Great. On another note, which I think everyone here would be keen to know, and having been through the exercise myself with Harish, writing a book together is a hard one. It's not an easy peasy task. So how did you manage to negotiate that? I mean, that itself is a challenge,
There were lots of fights. There were a lot of fights because there were so many 30 years. There were many, many more stories to add.
Yeah.
That Pradeep was at the computer. He said, well, I don't have because it was during lockdown and our office was, we couldn't access some of the papers. So whatever we could access and the files that we had, and of course, we had friends who added to it. But many of the stories that I wanted, maybe there'll be a second book because I want to tell those stories of the individuals who did fantastic things. They were members of public. And I just wanted to mention, Julie, when you talk about people in government, some of my closest friends, so 30 years, have been people in government. And they're all the IAS officers. We don't work with ministers. It's just the civil servants we work with.
Very wise, very wise. I'll wait for our responders to come back to you. I'm sure they will have plenty of questions. I'll move on to Dr. Shangjukta Dasgupta, if I might. Shangjukta Di is here.
Hello. Yeah.
Hi. Shangjukta Di, I think all readers pretty much, if I can generalize it, will agree on one point about your book, It Begins at Home, and that is poets and writers are truly the unacknowledged legislators of the world. What you've done is bring back to us the issues of the daily grind that women face. What made you write this book? You've written extensively, you're a poet, but these are all stories. I'm talking about a story like suicide, which blew me away right from the start because of the thematics in the story. Although, if you go right through the selection, a story like Freedom, I feel the feminist in you, with all the training that we've had in gender studies and feminism, is made accessible to a reader who might not really be able to come to that so easily. So how did you configure, how did you imagine the writing of this book? We're really interested in finding out from you as a writer, how did it work with you?
So hello, everyone, and good evening. And thank you, Julie, for that very generous introduction. We have been friends for a very long time. And also thank you for reading the book. And of course, it's very impressive, the work of Pradeep and Bonani. So this blending of documentation and representation that you have brought in to this platform is also very interesting. And I'm glad that Pradeep is there. There is some sort of gender balance. Yes. So, otherwise, we would have suffered from serious imbalance. Yes. And of course, you see my earlier book of short stories, which was called Abuse and Other Short Stories. That was published around 2013. Now, this is a recent collection of my short stories, which have been published in the Statesman and other journals. Now, I have very specifically worked on my stories in order to emphasize the content. And the content has always been about the well-being or the agency of women or the lack of agency of women. And there I have also tried not to locate the content in an urban space all the time. And I have very specifically, because when you write in English, what you find mostly is that you are writing about urban characters or probably suburban, but you rarely can reach people of the remote areas and those who are voiceless, marginalized, the wretched of the earth, as the way we call it. But that is very, very rarely represented in contemporary fiction. And that is precisely an experiment I wanted to bring in through my understanding of the ordinary people, the invisible people who are visible all the time, but we do not notice them. And that is why I thought that I should use the English language and also bring in a content that you will find in vernacular literature a lot. But you do not find that represented in the sort of stories that I have written, or in English short stories written by Indian writers of probably my age group or even younger for that matter. So I thought this would be a good experiment. The second thing is, as you have referred to me as a feminist commentator and critic, I felt that, again, we needed to emphasize that. And there, of course, the stories are ones which are revelatory, which interrogate what we take for granted in our times or in all times. And I have tried to represent stories that I have heard, stories that I thought occurred, I created from probably a chance reference to a particular experience, like the one you just referred to. That's the first short story, Just Another Suicide. That was a casual conversation with my domestic helper. And suddenly, as we were talking, I realized what a world there is outside Kolkata. It's happening all the time, and we are so innocent about it. And we are eliding the presence of this huge group, even in the city itself. When we think in terms of the urban poor, when we think in terms of those who live under the flyover and those who fly on the flyovers. Yes.
Yes.
So I wanted to bring these contrasts into my stories. And I hope that the stories are also readable, because, you know, if the stories have too much of purpose, they become quite unreadable. But
yes, that is our problem, I guess. When we wear the academic hat, we are often erring on the side of theory, right?
yeah.
Sanjukta, if I might just ask you straight off, a book like It Begins at Home, what was the reason? How hard is it, for instance, to get a literary agent?
Begins at home.
Gurudash, may I ask you to please mute the noise from people who are not speaking? Very disturbing to the rest of us. Whoever's got Gianluca's phone.
Yeah, that's a very stylish iPhone, I think.
It's done, ma'am. It's done.
So, Sanjukta,
Yeah.
would you say that for first-time debut writers, it's hard to get into the big-time publishing? That's a tough question, but if you would care to answer it, I think a lot of people would be interested and benefit.
I think, you know, way back when I was first writing my short stories and my poems, when I started off with poetry, I talked to some of the top publishers, and I remember one of them saying, "Oh, you write poetry, why don't you write short stories?" When I wrote short stories, they said, you should try a novel. Yes. So the big brand, big banner book publishers,
Yes.
you know, unless somehow you are able to really create an interest in the
Yes.
work you have written,
Yes.
it is very difficult, at least, and which is why I think the independent publishers who have been providing a platform for those of us, we are wannabes. Yes, you
Yes.
cannot say that we are those in that range of top writers, because our publishers are small publishers.
Yeah, but this is where I think they're doing a great job, because they're giving you, as you say, a platform, and they're
Yes.
also providing a way in which activism, which is what each one of you in your own way is doing, and especially when you're talking to Bonani and Pradeep's projects and work, and then as you will see when our poet here, Dr. Paramita Mukherjee Malik, is talking about ecology in her poems, it's fascinating that it is these independent publishers who are taking on so much. Dalit literature is being published by them. First-time writers, even writers of repute such as you. So I just wanted to bring this out from a writer as well known as you, an academic, that small-time publishers are really doing a lot to go that extra mile. So
you see, there are two categories there. You know, for critical writing, I've been published by Sage, Orient, Orient Black Swan.
Yes.
But when or Vishwabharati for that matter, and then Sahitya Academy for translations, because they don't do creative unless you translate somebody's work.
Right, right.
And I couldn't understand the logic of that, but that's it. So, whereas the smaller publishers are those who are independent publishers, as you describe them, they are the ones who are really encouraging the creative writers mostly.
Yes.
But there is one problem, that is marketing and distribution.
Yes.
There they fail dismally.
Yes.
And thanks to Amazon and Flipkart,
yes,
nowadays at least the visibility of your titles is ensured if that publisher is keen to do that.
True.
And there are some publishers like Sahitya Academy, which is a central government Ministry of Culture organization. They were also very laid back about promoting what they are publishing. Once it's published, it's shelved and you go to the next book.
Yeah.
So, which is why even in Sahitya Academy meetings, I have kept on insisting that books should be not just read, but books should be ones which should be part of the school and college and university curriculum published by these publishing houses.
Thank you so
that
much.
happens, we can't go there.
I think you've hit it on the head. Absolutely brilliant.
Thank
Let's
you.
turn to Shumita, Dr. Shumita Banerjee. Would love to hear from you about how you gathered these stories, as what is fascinating. The conversations we've had before, sitting at the Bengal Club. After that, I could hardly go to the Bengal Club beautiful ladies' washroom, because I felt there would be a hand coming out from the next cubicle and grabbing my ankle. But you know, your ghosts are all so benign. Shumita, how did you conceive of those ghost stories? You need to unmute.
I love listening to people, and I love listening to stories. And I think it's just like, one is that I do believe in maybe the energy of the universe. I mean, people have all kinds of experiences. So one can't sort of dismiss it as being something that doesn't happen. And I think that, as you mentioned, I like my spirit world I don't enjoy horror stories really. So I wouldn't write a horror story. So in that context, I think that is why I would make my characters more benign and leave people with hope. You know, I mean, the stories have that. That's what I feel, that my stories do have that hope at the end of it. And a lot of the other stories actually deal with serious issues also. But it's not like there is any, message to be driven or anything like that. So it's through the stories, through the choices that people make, and they reveal themselves as to how they pan out, So they make a statement without really sort of putting it in the eye. So there are other topics that are there also in terms of social issues.
There is a story yes, there's a lovely story which says, which is entitled "How About a Date," right? I think a lot of people, maybe 4 or 5 people, have come back to me and said, "Can you imagine? You seem to have captured the essence of writing the perfect short story, because each of your stories, Shumita, has a twist in the tale, which is what O. Henry and everybody else would do. And I think Vinod Pillai will be talking more about that. So I won't get into, won't spoil his party. But I just wanted you to know how much that is appreciated, that you have 2 spirits and your message is spectacularly universal, that you can't get a relationship between a husband and a wife right in your lifetime. You have to wait to become ghosts in a cemetery and decide to go on a date. I think that's so charming. So,
yeah. So again, there is no end to it. I mean, if you really want it, then, and if you do make a choice at some point, then you do make that choice. That's what I'm saying, that there is that element of hope. There is some humor maybe, but again, it's a serious issue. If the rest of the story is read, then it's a question of choices. And a lot of the stories deal with relationships, which to me, that's something very important, even in the work that I do. So I bring it all together into the stories also.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Paramita, are you around? Dr. Paramita Mukherjee Malik, our poet, a force of positivism. Are you here? Paramita, you are here. I see your name here. Okay, what we'll do is we will start on our responders because we don't have a heck of a lot of time. We have, we're comfortable. So let's start with Dr. Choitali Moitro, who will be speaking to us about Dr. Sanjukta Dasgupta's collection of short stories, Feminist in Thrust, Powerful, It Begins at Home. Choitali, are you here?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Julie Di, for this wonderful chance, and my respectful regards to dear Sanjukta Di. I'm proud to be here after reading so many of your books, and particularly this one. So what I felt after, thank you, Sanjukta Di. What I felt after reading this book, instead of taking up issues like feminism and gender, for which you are famous, I think what you're trying to do is to look at or to sort of focus on the complexities of urban life, technically Gesellschaft, where one can find the presence of, shall I say, rampant individualism, a lot of disunity, and a lot of non-functioning that happens in the families, which results in the types of sufferings for women. For instance, the Bang story, It Begins at Home, The theme is not a new one, but the way you treat it makes it evident that the daughter and the mother suffer equally. That is something which I found very, very touching. I also would like to talk about another short story which focuses on the individual, where Abhik is enamored by one of his classmates, Sonia, I think, and he never comes back to the family in Kolkata, which is again something which we all know about. But gradually, Abhik demands whatever he would inherit, quote unquote, inherit. And in the process, where his father, Jayanto, was at one point so proud to juxtapose money, I mean, rupee with the dollar, a time comes which sort of in the subconscious of Abhik's mind, this father cannot just sort of have a money equivalent between a rupee and a dollar, because the tragedy is too deep. Poised against these stories, you have the building up of a space for a community, which you looked into great detail, that is the Gemeinschaft. And this tries to, all these stories tries to sort of, they try to wonderfully highlight the idea of a community where, quote unquote, we and our becomes very, very important. But even in these stories, your narrative is enriched. For instance, Bhajan Ram's Last Night, where you find the space that you try to create, and you take in the 1947 scenario where the layered political canvas gives a very, very rich narrative. So each and every story, I think, is very, very good. I find them more incidental and descriptive, not really dramatic. And I think that is intentional. So let me round off by saying that most of these characters who sort of remain in your mind are very similar to Shangjukta Sita, who rambles through the brambles in the green forest, in the blue sky, chasing a golden deer. Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank
Choitali.
you.
As
Thank
always,
you, Choitali, for that very, very insightful reading.
as
Thank
always,
you, Didi.
on
Thank you, Didi.
point. Yes, wonderful. Thank you, Choitali. We'll just move on to the others and come back if we have time for our authors to read a little and maybe have a short conversation with our responders. So Raka Mukherjee, someone who was my ex-student, taught her in the master's course, Calcutta University, standing student. Let's hear what you have to say, and a feminist out and out. Raka, are you there?
Yes, ma'am. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Good evening, everyone. And thank you, Dr. Julie Mehta, once again for inviting me to review or to tell my opinion on Dr. Shangjukta Dasgupta's book of short stories, collection of short stories. It Begins at Home. I think I have managed to read at least 11 of the 16 very wonderful short stories. But what spoke to me the most about the collection is that while I was reading each story, although I was meeting the characters for the first time, I knew that I knew each one of them through anecdotes, through lived experiences, and through tales I have heard growing up or reading a lot of literature, being a literature student. And a few short stories that really touched me were, of course, the titular story, It Begins at Home, because that's the story post-pandemic. We have heard so many stories about abuse, which begins at home, and how daughters, how even sons, it's not gender specific, how they cannot speak up against their own family members, their own blood, their own kin. And this story, although I was reading it for the first time, Mimi Mitro was our neighbor. Mimi Mitro was someone we knew. Similarly, the first story about just a suicide, I mean, it was not just a suicide, but also how the piece of fish that Kalyani so lovely, she was so happy while eating it, because that was the first time she received such a treat. She had to cook a lot of fish, I'm sure, for her husband and for everybody else in the household. But that becomes the very last meal, and also the poison that she had to take in. She had to give up her life so that her husband could remarry again. And also some of the things among the stories, like the naming of the characters, or a few hints of intertextuality, as we literature students always try to find. And Dr. Dasgupta has managed to put in a few. I can recall reading Wretched of the Earth in one of the stories, and also how Lady Macbeth's sleepwalking scene comes in. And I realized that through our academic reading, and also through the experiences that we listen to, for example, this short story Divide, how we see that divide happening with the children of our house helps always wearing oversized clothes, or or in the short story The Bird's Eye View, the life under the flyover. I could think of the Goriahat flyover, and I could think of a personal experience where I had been part of a group, and we had gone and helped the children who did not know what color pencils were, or how to use them, or how to play with them. So overall, what I take back from the stories is that stories repeat themselves, just as history, and it's a palimpsest of lived experiences that the collection brings to me. And what is important is, although some people might say that, I have heard this before, or this is known, but how important, how crucial it is to keep repeating that stories, no matter the time we live in, will continue to repeat if we do not do something about it, if we do not make the change. So I would like to congratulate and thank Dr. Dasgupta for writing the book, and also Dr. Mehta for giving me the opportunity to speak. Thank you.
Thank you, Raka.
Thank you, ma'am.
Sorry, Julie, I couldn't unmute myself then. And
That's
then the
okay.
host allowed me. Yeah, I'm
That's
so
okay.
sorry.
You're
I'm
on
so sorry.
you're on track right now. So we'll start with you, Paramita. As I said, through all our book club discussions that you've so devotedly attended, responded, mostly fiction, some non-fiction, some memoir, but as a poet, you've always given us that light that shines even beyond what seems to be despondency, dejection, dysfunctionality in our lives. So when it came to the golden window, how did nature become the front and center of your thinking? Can you explain a little bit of that?
As you say, I just love nature, and it's a happiness factor to me. Nature is a happiness factor to me, and I call myself a banyan root. I search for nourishment everywhere, and nourishment to me is positivity. So I find nourishment even in the hardest of rocks. So you can understand, when nature is there, I feel more, very, very encouraged, very happy in that way. So maybe nature is a great inspiration to me. Nature is always a great inspiration to me. And I feel, all of us, we have some depression, some sadness in our lives, where nature helps us to come out of that. So I really, really love nature in that way. So in my golden window, it was like nature again, who made me write these poems. And, one day I was seeing the shine of a golden window on a skyscraper. And so, I felt we poets, we have that golden shine at times in our heart. And, we can look at different things in a different aspect. So these poems, like the Golden Window collection, came out. And I'm so happy Professor Dasgupta Shangjukta Di is here. She wrote the foreword to this. And I think that made the book magical. So I wanted this book this time. So I requested you to bring this book to the fore this time.
Wonderful. We'll come back with your responders in a minute. But in your own way, many of your poems are activist poems as well. The elephant poem, where you reacted, and your reaction to how an elephant was killed, a pregnant elephant, with a pineapple bomb, you know? We'll come back to that in a minute, Paramita. We have one more responder to Shangjuktadi's collection, someone who is new to our book club, a scholar, Professor Naina Dey. Since we are running a little tight on time, Naina, let me just say that it's a pleasure to have her. She's one of your students, ex-students. She's a
Yes.
professor now.
A very dear
so
student.
Naina, let's have she did her MPhil and her PhD with you, right?
Yes, yes. And I had to insist that she should transform into a feminist if she wants to stay with me.
So
And
Naina,
she said, no, I think I'm a humanist.
so that must have been a hard fight. So Naina, go ahead, please. 3 minutes is all you've got. Yeah.
Thank you, Meta, for making me a part of today's discussion. I'm really grateful to be able to talk on Dr. Shangjukta Dasgupta's recent volume of short stories, It Begins at Home, which has been published by Virasat. And I'm also grateful to Choitali Di because she was the one who suggested that I join today's program. And when I was reading ma'am's book, It Begins at Home, first and foremost, of course, when we look at the title, Charity Begins at Home, and she has somehow turned it around, and you know, we see something else, we expect something else at the beginning, and we see something else emerging. And I think it is difficult to make general comments on this book because each story here is unique. Each are so differently flavored. It's better that I streamline my comments, and you know, it begins with just another suicide, and then what follows is a few things about how she is, you know, dealing with the Dalit, the marginalized, and at the same time the woman, the subaltern. It seems that you know, society, we will have to discuss social conditioning, we will have to discuss hierarchical structuring, we will have to discuss cross consumerism when talking about these stories. But I have to admit that, you know, I usually find time in the night to go through stories or poetry. And what disturbed me most was It Begins at Home and hair raising. You know, we always talk of the urban-rural divide, but over here, I think when we talk of the urban-rural divide, these become almost irrelevant, because right now, when we are asking ourselves, is feminism relevant in the new millennium? I mean, Shangjukta Di has said that, you know, she wanted, I wanted to be a humanist, and she wanted me to be a feminist. I do not think that humanism or feminism are entirely dissociated. They are, you know, very intricately intertwined. And It Begins at Home is much more disturbing because of the way the mother is trying to hush up things. This is a story that, and it is a very good choice for the title of the book itself, I would say, because it deals with something that society has stigmatized. It exists, but we do not want to acknowledge it. And herein lies the problem of where feminism is right at this point. I remember reading a book that was titled Sacred Cows, which had a subtitle, Is Feminism Relevant in the New Millennium? It was by
I'm
Rosalind.
so sorry. Nan, I'm so
Yes.
sorry, but will you wrap it up because we're running out
Yes,
of
yes, sure, yes. So I think it is a book that has dug out the invisible aspects, the darker underbelly of society, and the fragmentation of the family in a, in a way that we through particularly this story. I don't want to go into other stories. Through something that makes us rethink, that will, I hope it somehow we can address this, because you were talking about activism, Dr. Mehta. Somehow I do not know how to redress these problems, because often the victims do not come out in the open. I think the ending of the story is much more fortunate for the protagonist. The protagonist has somehow been able to establish herself, but not all victims are as lucky. Thank you so much for allowing me to talk.
Thank you, Nana.
Very true and very well rounded up. Shangjukta Di, shall we come back to, if you want to engage a little later, shall we just go through all the writers first?
Of course,
Okay, thank you
ahead.
so much.
We
Thank
don't have
you.
too much time now.
No, so we have about 40 minutes. We should be done, but I just want to call on Dr. Jean Carroll Ewart for Once Upon a City and give us your views. Dr. Ewart.
Thank you. It is such a pleasure
from the University of Florida.
Oh, thank you. It is such a pleasure to be here with you today. I think this is my 6th meeting with this group,
yes,
and it's always been enjoyable. So Julie asked me to do a thing that I don't usually do. I don't usually read nonfiction. I'm a narratologist by trade. I'm deeply immersed in literary theory, and I rarely read nonfiction. When I do, it's usually family history. And so I read this book, and I want to say how incredibly moved I was by it. It was such a beautiful testimony to what people can do when they bring themselves together and agree on a shared goal. I've lived in a lot of big cities. I've lived in Paris, I've lived in Philadelphia, I've lived in New York. I'm happy to be in a small town now. It's not less political, but the power is less entrenched than it can be in big cities. And when I have lived in cities, I've often felt despairing of enacting real change because power just gets so entrenched over decades. When I was in India, we did not go to Calcutta. Our guide actually recommended against it. She was from Madras, and she said, oh, the poverty is so terrible, the suffering of the children and the street people. You won't be able to handle it. And then I read this book and I thought, I am so sorry we didn't go to Calcutta, because it's stereotyped, I think, by this kind of view. But I don't have very much time. I want to say what I really liked was the narrative voice, because when people are writing together, it's difficult to have a unified narrative voice, but the voice was so, I'm searching for the adjectives I want. It was positive, even though problems are overwhelming. And it was cheerful, and it was engaging. I mean, I felt like I was reading a real person talking to me, not, a committee of people did incredible work, but a voice that they were unified on spoke to me of how cities could be transformed. And I have not read recently a piece of nonfiction that I was so interested in and moved by and found so compelling. And I want to thank everyone who was involved in this project. Thank you.
Jean, you better get here before I leave the city, because I sure will not show you the bad parts of the city. And there are so many of us who would like to show you what a beautiful city this is. So you better get here fast.
When are you leaving, Julie?
No, not in a rush, not in a great rush.
Okay.
In a year, maybe.
Okay. It will take us a while. I have a daughter who's immune suppressed, and it will be a while before we can travel.
Well, look forward to it, and look forward to seeing you again and again.
Thank you so much.
The perception is just always amazing from you, and we'll see if we can have a conversation. Banani and Pradeep, are you around? Pradeep
Yes,
and
I can
Banani?
see them.
You
Yes.
can, so can I. So would you have anything to say to Jean Carroll?
Well, first, thank you very much for very generous words. I think the point you made about the narrative and the voice is something we did have to struggle with, but when you're in a relationship of husband and wife, you know who's going to win. And I had no problems accepting the fact that her approach through the years, and not just in writing the book, but her approach through the years has been constructive, patient. Let's wait. Let's give it a chance. Whereas the short spell that I dabbled in the private sector and corporate sector, I tended to be impatient, task-oriented. You know, let's get it done. What's the timeline, etc. So I think to some extent the narrative picked up on that tussle between patience and brusqueness or abrasiveness, and I'm glad that you found that our biggest objective was that this should be readable.
Yeah.
That we should not sound preachy. We shouldn't be sounding as if we're telling others, oh, this is the recipe. This is how we should do things. That we should really tell it like the stories that they were when they unfolded. And I'm happy to hear you find it something that you think was exceptional. Thank you.
Thank you guys. Vivek, looking forward to your take on Pradeep and Banani's book. Mr. Vivek Krishna?
Yeah, can you hear me, Julie?
Yes, perfect. Thank you, Vivek. Go ahead. Where are you now? Are you back in?
No, I'm still in your city, so but I'm on the outskirts. So.
Okay, go ahead.
Right. Let me go straight through with it so we don't take up too much time. An unusual book choice for a book club meeting, since it's not been a work of creative fiction, but it does have a nice cast of characters, compelling storylines, and a strong start and a finish. So it does work well in our discussion format, one of which and a book which I would strongly recommend for readers of all ages, interests, and backgrounds. Because of the subject matter, the choice of using what reads like a series of articles chronicling citizen action in Kolkata over 30 years was the right decision. It is well written, has a clear structure, and makes good use of language, which I always appreciate. So just to start off, I will be quoting stuff from your book so that I don't go around recreating the wheel. So to start off, Khushru Irani's quotation, "Don't just preach," he said. If you really want to get something with an issue, get somewhere with an issue, do something. Then people will sit up and take notice. So the book starts deceptively because in the first pause taken up in 1990, The Fountain of Joy, the issues are not resolved. And that, when I read it, I thought, oh, well, this is what happens. This is a good way to fall back and not do anything else. But they were undeterred. They went on to achieve a number of successes. Corporate attack to change the nature of the Maidan, which was partially successful. The telling victory in saving of Victoria Park. The attack on the carrying capacity of Kamak Street by a proposed multi-storied government office building. The conversion of Rawdon Square Park into a parking lot. Protection of the East Calcutta wetlands from corporate greed, sound and emissions pollution from traffic on Kolkata streets, and destruction of roadside trees on Panditya Road for building purposes and Kamak Street and Sohrawardah Avenue to speed up traffic movement. Some of these things, having lived in Calcutta for more than 40 years, I saw it firsthand as well. And I did congratulate whoever was doing the work in the background. So they were not standing up on the road and said, pat me on the back for the work I did. So great work done. Thank you. Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, concerned citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever does. Quotation from Margaret Mead. And the epilogue proposes some truths around citizen action, which are interesting. Firstly, that the system needs to know that there is an active, interested, and constructive clientele. Whether it is the municipal government, the media, corporates, or other NGOs, a call to action energizes the entire network of urban stakeholders. I'm quoting you directly. The idea that delivers of services and its impacts are being watched, evaluated, and responded to, whether positively or negatively, makes a substantial difference to how the players perceive and play their roles. And citizens uninvolved in the affairs of their city are what the economists call free riders. If the shareholders seem not to be bothered, why should a city official be any different? A city gets the quality of service depending on how active and demanding its citizens are. And we in India, I think, tend to be very fatalistic. Oh, it's mild, that's what I've been born into, and I hope something happens, but I can't do very much about it. So yeah, you really have to get off your backside. Secondly, government is not a monolith. In the 30 years that story span, political ideologies shifted radically, leadership styles changed drastically, and policy compulsions were altered dramatically. It was the individuals and not the all-pervasive script that made the difference. Bureaucrats were as likely to be risk-averse or risk-willing, whether their political bosses were colored red, green, or blue. And I've added some of the colors here. But as I can see, if you're following how they've written, how delightful the language is. Thirdly, an astoundingly large number of important decisions appear to be based on insufficient information or even application of mind. These decisions typically lurk under loaded words such as development or beautification or infrastructure. And citizens assume that large projects must be based on an investigation analysis, but driving some of these costly capers are whims, egotistical scent marking, and even self-serving agenda. Oh, lovely language. Fourthly, the judiciary has emerged as a beacon of hope. Invariably, these are cases where the third estate has responded and granted relief from the cost of poor action or inaction by the executive. Worries about judicial overreach are unnecessary when poor implementation can be linked to violation of constitutional rights, existing laws, or legal precedents. Judges do respond to the presence and court casts of counsels with stature, but bumbling petitioners appearing in person also succeed in getting a considered hearing and impactful orders, which is that's really positive and uplifting. A final truth that integrity of purpose matters, whether it is the IAS or the police fraternity, the legal brotherhood, or the heads of educational institutions and corporate honchos, word gets around and an agenda with integrity is respected. If there's one single truth distilled from out the stories narrated, it is this: shared goals linked to the city's well-being garner acceptance and appreciation. Active citizenship in pursuit of a more livable city is indeed the ultimate unifier. A green cover policy for Calcutta is essential, and this can only come when civil society partners with the government for the sake of the city. It will have to be NGOs and the academics and the lawyers and journalists who will have to chip away at the systemic inertia and resistance that confronts the formulation of such a policy. And to quote the way that they've written it in their book, unless someone like you cares a whole awful lot, nothing is going to get better. It's not. From the Lorax by Dr. Seuss. Thank you.
Thank you, Vivek. You've left us all breathless, but you've meticulously read the book as meticulously possible as Bonani and Pradeep have probably researched it and archived it. Thank you so much, Vivek. Never disappointed in you. Thank you. I think it would be a good idea to see what Dr. Smita Kothari would have to say about Dr. Paramita Mukherjee Malik's poetry. Dr. Kothari is from the University of Toronto and University of Arizona, Arizona State University actually, and she is a scholar of religious studies, Jainism in particular. Smita, go ahead.
Thank you, Dr. Julie Mehta. I'm not used to usually addressing Julie in such formality, having been friends for so long. But I am delighted, as always, to be a part of this very erudite group. And thank you, Dr. Paramita Mukherjee Malik, for this wonderful book. As a scholar, as Julie pointed out, of religious studies with the focus or lens on South Asian religions and the environment, the book really spoke to me, as it may to many other people. So like Vivek have jotted down what I want to speak so I don't ramble. The Golden Window is an anthology of poems spoken from the heart. The collection is structured as you clearly see in 5 parts, namely sky, forest, river, land, and abode. Dr. Paramita Mukherjee Malik is a poet who is deeply touched by nature and the environment we share as humans. The poet finds joy in the simple beauty of nature in the sky and many of the forest and river poems. And of course, I can't delve into all of them given the short time limit I have, but I'd highly recommend the book to be read. In one of the river poems, in Lest I, which was written around Christmas 2019 in the Sundarbans, she wants to be mindful and present. As a scholar of Jainism, as a scholar of Buddhism, this mindfulness is very much, you are aware of it reading her poems. And yet at the same time, part of my own work was not just religion and environment, but equally social justice. So we see this in permeating in her poems. Quoting from Lest I say, well, she says rather, I will not write lest I miss your beauty. I will not look within lest I miss the wonder. I will not concentrate on anything lest I leave anything unnoticed. I will not wander anywhere lest I lose your wonder. End of quote. But peace and joy is not always possible. As she in her own comments said, she's a very positive person who looks for positivity in most things. And the poems are by and large uplifting. But in these difficult times, as the author says in her preface to the anthology, it was compiled during the time of COVID, and many of the poems touch upon the collective loss we as humans feel in this time. Many of us, myself including, who have lost loved ones or have just lived through this pandemic will find pathos in those particular poems. As a scholar of Jainism who's connected with ahimsa, nonviolence, I was struck by the compassionate, empathetic, and nonviolent tone of the poems. She has the reader feel the pain at the inhumanity of the killing of a pregnant elephant, which Julie mentioned earlier in Salvaging Humanity. And I am just going to read this short poem because it touched me to the core at our collective inhumanness. She says, humans are evacuated to save them from storms. Humans are quarantined to save others from COVID harm. But how can we save the virtues of the human race? How can humans harm other innocent creatures and then the world face? Oh man, what did the poor elephant do? Why did you kill her and her unborn baby too? Was the firecracker-filled pineapple a joke? Aren't you ashamed of yourself? Doesn't your conscience choke? Hurting and killing a creature, a horrific thing, a sick adventure. Do I call you a human or a savage? How do I wipe off cruelty and your humanity salvage? End of quote. Similarly, there's a seething anger in the collection of poems expressing the subjugation of women and in light of the recent Roe versus Wade decision in the US, these poems really resonate how even the most, the world's largest democracy, in the sense, the most powerful democracy, is dealing with these things. So here she goes in The Goddess in Me, she says, I'm a simple woman with simple thoughts, with a simple life of meager needs. But when I see wrongdoings, and I'm skipping a bit around, my blood boils and I am in anger and fume. The goddess in me wakes up, then I take control. I hold on to the rein. And again in the poem Eve, she says, she rails, was I not made from the rib of you? Then why have you subjugated me for centuries? Why did I have to cry for justice for so long? You kept my feet, my, anyway, that's about, so she, in Eve, she talks about, to just say it really, there are many, many poems that resonate. And since I don't have justice to do to all of them, I will just conclude here. And thank you, Dr. Paramita Mukherjee Malik, for giving us this wonderful, thought-provoking and insightful poems.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Dr. Smita. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Thank you, Smita. As usual, you bring a totally unique quotient to your explications. Okay, Dr. Roma Bhattacharya, I think these poems have appealed to Roma as well. Roma is a PhD from Oxford, worked for the United Nations, done a huge amount of consulting for NGOs all over the world. Roma, let's have your response to Paramita's poems.
Thank you, Julie. It's a delight and an honor to review our very own poet, Dr. Paramita Mukherjee Malik. Thank you, Bengal Club and Julie. Paramita, we've been fellow participants in these discussions where you've spoken often of your passion for optimism. But if I may, your poems hold a deeper significance. In the preface to your new anthology, The Golden Window, you write, Julie quoted this earlier, I was sitting at my balcony, the sun was setting, the golden light suddenly made me realize our heart is like a golden window reflecting the beauty of the world. First, in my view, in an often overly intellectualized, ratiocinative kind of century, these poems offer a restoration of the human experience, a recentering of the human heart, and a yearning for beauty. Looking onto pink and orange clouds from an airplane, she writes, I feel delighted to see such beauty from my window's brink. The window's brink, in my view, becomes the poetic soul and a particular way of seeing, where all that is seen is transformed by the heart. The trees are dancing with joy newly found, she writes. You're in good company, Paramita. I came to this meeting by a strange concatenation of events. I was rereading Keats's letters, where all those years ago he spoke of such things. I just shared them with Julie and by serendipity received an invitation to review this anthology. So I did read your poems from that golden window, if I may, where the senses, the emotions, the feeling world, that of beauty and the imagination are being called by Keats and the Romantic poets to the center, in contrast to the so-called rational world, the world of cold reason and argumentation, the owl-winged faculty of reason, to quote Coleridge, to a world where beauty is truth and truth is beauty. Your book of poems is about the sky, the forest, the river, but it's also about a way of seeing, where the poet's eyes alight on the images of beauty, both in the landscape and in small everyday objects that a homebound woman under COVID espies, the bougainvillea, the newly flowered sunflower in her balcony. But what these do for her is connect her to feelings of joy, peace, and hope. She never takes the imagery into unnecessary intellectual complexity or into an inaccessible metaphoric world, but rather deliberately chooses simplicity, as Smita has just said so beautifully. It's a philosophic and spiritual choice to choose simplicity. To a less discerning reader, the poems may appear simple, but what you realize slowly is she's actually reducing everyday life to essence. and simplicity is a virtue that we have all lost. Second, the poet brings idealism back into our lives, much needed when human beings are losing hope. Once again, you're in good company. Plato took us to the idealist mimesis, as did the romantics, and our own Vishwakovi, Rabindranath Tagore, did the same. At every bend, Paramita, the poet, finds a new song. Peace is when you sail on a boat on a silent river, she writes, and the lotus pond and fields become symbols of inner peace. The Grimm's fairy tales an assertion of the imagination. Paramita, through her poetry, uses nature to restore also the ethical, which again Smita has spoken about. The poet's critical, how can we save the virtues of the human race, is, I think, far from facile, a key issue facing our contemporary world. Presidency College and later Oxford and my work for the transformation of society with the United Nations worldwide taught me the importance of civilizational values undergirding the human experience. This anthology does that. It's a reassertion of these values from the prism of poetry, critical at this juncture of our human history, isn't it? And since this is our last meeting, may I end by saying, hasn't this been the raison d'etre of this book club, to look at the human experience and to collectively discuss things civilizational? Thank you.
Thank you, Roma. As always, you leave us quite breathless. And did I hear the last book club?
Well, I thought you said today was the last meeting. I may be wrong. Forgive me.
The last meeting for the year of our current subcommittee.
Oh, I'm delighted to hear that. Delighted to hear that.
Mr. Ambarish Dasgupta's steerage as president, but I sure hope this won't be the last book club.
Wonderful,
because
wonderful.
we want to have all of you back here again.
And so do I. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Roma. That was really, it blew us away. Thank you. Okay, let's move to Ayushi Ray, also ex-master student, bright and sparkling. Ayushi, feminism, feminist to the core. Are you here?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, go ahead. What did you think?
Can I just thank Dr. Roma?
Yes, please.
Thank you so much, Roma Bhattacharya. I'm overwhelmed. I'm overwhelmed. Thank you.
It was a pleasure to review your book, Paramita, and hope we keep talking through these discussions.
Absolutely.
Pleasure.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Ayushi, go ahead.
Yes, sorry. Good evening to all. I'm sorry for not switching on my camera because my internet is very bad, and I think nobody will be able to hear me if I switch on the camera. Anyway, reading Dr. Paramita Mukherjee's work has been a pleasure. And the first thing that I felt is that someone who is a trend scientist, how can someone who is a trend scientist be so good with words and be so brilliant in expressing herself? And by the time I'd completed the golden window, I was mesmerized. And every poem struck a chord with me, but because of time constraint, I had to just pick and choose 3 poems to and these are the ones which touched me the most. And the first one is My Identity, which Dr. Mukherjee wrote about 5 years back. But unfortunately, this poem is most relevant at the moment. Here she asks who she was before she was born and what her religion was and what her caste was. And ultimately, she stopped searching for her identity when she realized that she was a human being, firstly and lastly. And in such tumultuous times that our country is going through, when people are being heavily discriminated on the basis of their sexual identity and religion, Dr. Mukherjee explains that how important it is to remember that we all have the same blood running through our veins and that we are ultimately all human beings. The next poem would be Eve. Here, Dr. Mukherjee puts out the question that has been tormenting women for centuries now. She asks that since Eve was born from the ribs of the God himself, and was there at the dawn of the civilization, why then women had to fight for their place in the society for so long? Why then women were to ask to have reduced waistlines while books got snatched away from them? Here we also find mentions of Joan of Arc and Kona from Indian mythology, women who had the guts to speak out and suffered the consequence for that. I really liked how she put into words all the objectification and all the way women were subjected to discrimination and criticism for centuries and for years. And her poem reminds us of the women's suffrage, the first wave of feminism, when women crowded the streets to take a hold of what should have been theirs in the first place. And what's worse, she reminds us in the end that we have not yet achieved the equal status and women still have a long, long way to go for that. And the third poem would be My Life is Because of You. It's like a beautiful ode to mothers and motherhood. Dr. Mukherjee reminds the readers of the sacrifices that a mother has to go through to bring up a child. The persons we grow up to become is deeply influenced by our mothers. And we probably never really thank our mothers because of that. But the way she put it, I just felt the poem so much, and I just related the poem so much, that how big a contribution is mothers in our life, and it is only and only because of our untiring efforts that we become somebody, and without our mothers we are incomplete. And lastly, I would like to say this to Dr. Mukherjee, that it has been wonderful reading her work, reading how master of work, words and poetry that she is. It has been a beautiful read.
Thank you so
for the
much, Ayushi.
opportunity.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ayushi. It's really the path that is made by walking. And I think Paramita Di has walked the path with us and has hopefully inspired the younger generation to start writing. And there's a poet in each one of us. I think she proves that. A scientist, you say, but right side and left side of the brain are both working, it seems. Thank you, Paramita Di. Okay, we've got another very interesting book up, and it's Chaurangi Charms. 7 of the 17 stories are ghost stories, but there are other stories too. So let's start with Vinod Pillai. Then we have Anushuya Pal, and then our very own super librarian Shebonti Sengupta of the Bengal Club. Let's start with Vinod. 3 minutes each, please. Go ahead.
Thank you, Dr. Julie Mehta, and good evening to all. First of all, I would like to thank Dr. Sumita Banerjee for this book. It's a wonderful book. I enjoyed reading it, and I'll quickly summarize what I thought about the book. I've jotted down a few points so that it becomes easier for me to stick within that time. The stories in this collection offer a slice of life where various characters deal with challenging situations and bring their unique insight and understanding to find resolution or closure and leave the reader with a feel-good ending. Now, the characters, be it living or dead, man or woman, young or old, or even a ghost, are dealt with a great deal of empathy, allowing the story to evolve organically without loading value judgments or taking strident positions. Prose is simple, but each situation has a unique flavor built into it and makes it easy to read and immensely relatable. Now, yeah, there are 7 stories that deal with the supernatural. 5, you have ghosts, and 2, you have the conch, and you also have the Devi intervening to solve Madan's problem in refuge. I found them very charming, and what I find interesting is that yes, the ghosts are not very terrifying characters here. They're very friendly, but that's something that normally one doesn't come to see, And in all these stories, you find that there's a sense of righteousness that prevails. The character, develops, like in Brishti or even in Chaurangi Charms. Wrongs are, righted, whether it's a ghost who's involved or living characters. And even in Camouflage, where Relina forgets her personal interests, it's a very big thing to do. And then she helps the police nab her friend Rathi. So this is what is unique about it. And what I felt is that it's very easy to read, very charming stories. And at the end, there's always a feel good. There's a closure, whatever issues that, the complexities that come up, there's a closure in the end, which leaves you feeling good and hopeful, which is very nice in this kind of time when, there are enough reasons to be hopeless. I'll just ask you 3 questions which came to my mind, which I thought, I would like to find answers for. The first question is, are your stories plotted out in advance, or do you allow the story to develop on its own? Stephen King distrusted plots and believed that plotting and the spontaneity of creation aren't compatible. The story which results from it is apt to feel artificial and labored. So I'm just curious to know how you go about your craft.
Vinod, for reasons of time, shall we just stick with one question and see how we go? Is that okay?
Okay.
Shumita?
So I would say I actually follow my characters. I create a character, and then if there is a situation, it's like I literally follow the character. And I try and see, and if you put yourself in the character's place, then the dialogue, the feelings, you have to feel with the character, and you have to feel what the character is feeling. So to that extent, I think that's how the story, it's not that I always have a specific ending or as Judy said, the twist in the tail. No, it's more a part of the process. It's really the journey. And I just want to say, for me, writing is I love writing. So that process itself is something I enjoy. So, and thank you very much for your words. Thank you, Vinod.
Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Vinod. I'm sorry we don't have time, but I can put you in touch with Shumita at some stage, and you can have a email conversation. I think that's perfectly fine because you're a writer yourself. So Vinod, that was very insightful, perceptive. Thank you for that. Shall we see what, maybe let's see what Shevonti has to say, and then we will turn it to Anusuya Pal, our avid reader, to tie it up. Shevonti, will you jump in and respond to Charangi Charms, which you've been reading?
Good evening, everyone. It was a fascinating experience for me to read the first short story by Dr. Shumita Banerjee, Charangi Charms. It completely transported me to a different world, a world of fantasy, imagination, far away from the complexities of an adult's world in which we all are living. And one very striking point which I could find was the simplicity of the language. The language is so simple and the style of writing is so lucid that it perfectly matches with the simplicity of the leading characters of the story, the children, and their innocence also. And after I finished, or rather while I was proceeding with the story, I could immediately connect it or correlate it with Oscar Wilde's short story, The Canterville Ghost. I find a great deal of similarity between the ghost of Maya and the ghost of Mr. Simon in Wilde's Canterville Ghost, that both the ghosts were suffering souls. They had suffered terribly. They were victims of human greed and human atrocity. And children who's always signify innocence, the blue-eyed little girl, Virginia, beautiful Virginia in Canterville Ghost, the way she pacified, she reconciled with the ghost of Mr. Simon. Here also, the children, Kismet and Kahani, they are full of pity and compassion towards the ghost of Maya and how they ultimately solve her problem. And they have pure and innocent souls, and this purity has been wonderfully expressed by Dr. Banerjee in her work. And at last, I would like to express a big thanks to Dr. Banerjee for bringing back the childhood memories to me through her story. And I would certainly recommend children to read these stories, the school children, to enhance their language and to express their love for reading books. Big thanks to everyone.
Thank you, Shebonti.
Thank you, Shebonti. Thank you.
Very, very original point that it could be read by young teens and children as well. You know, there's so much in it that appeals to the child mind, the Bildungsroman idea. Lovely. Thank you. Anusuya Pal, our
Hi.
very avid reader. Anusuya, let's have your views. Go ahead.
Yeah, good evening, everyone. And Dr. Banerjee, it was such a pleasure, and it's really an honor to be reviewing your first book. And who'll say it's a first book? It's been so well written, and it's a very enjoyable read. And obviously, you're very competent and versatile as a storyteller. I liked the way you built around the stories around various human traits, responses, decisions that make the skeletal structure of any person's life. And there's a versatility to all the stories that you have told. Each is so different from the other. I'm not going to go much into the world of spirits because I think we've all talked about it a bit. But I do like the way you have fleshed out all the contextual backgrounds, like in the story of How About a Date, where she writes, I felt watched and blamed. I did not feel trusted. There seemed to be secrets, and gradually I felt that we were on parallel rails. I dreaded being abused with words that were far more lethal than a physical hit. It was very, very articulately expressing the separation of two people who were once close and a relationship falling apart. Another quality about the stories that you have put forth are the description of the psychology of the narrator. And I think it comes from the fact that you are a counselor, a psychological counselor, and therefore it gives a lot of texture to the narrator. You know, when we know of the contextual support that you flesh out in the background. And it makes the story very vivid, like in the story titled Unfinished, where you know, her OCD is a bed in the process of being made and abandoned in the morning, a story left incomplete. The list is endless. The problem is that bee that buzzes in my bonnet does not stay contained just within my beginnings and endings. It encroaches into the lives of others around me. This is so articulately expressed, and how OCD in one person can really permeate the space into the other people around them. What the stories that really touched me were about the ones which were the very last one, the one, Why Not Me, Ma, where the girl speaks about why she is not being given any kind of importance or celebrated as an offspring. And also the stories Refuge or Sadhan Chatterjee, the stopgap hero. I mean, very minuscule qualities in people, but how they can feature in turning the, you know, the narrative in any one person's life. I also really liked Mango Orchard, and you know, the confusion in the girl and how it comes about. On the whole, it's a fantastic first book, but as your foreword, which was brilliantly written by Dave Chatterjee, the foreword, Mukherjee, talks so much about your PhD thesis in the research of women criminals in the 18th and 19th century. So I'm sure I would really enjoy reading something where you would touch upon all of this, and it would really give a lot of meat to mull upon, you know, if in the future you were to write something like that. So yes, congratulations on this book. And I really am looking forward to more such writing from you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Anushya.
Lovely wrap up. Lovely wrap up.
Thank you. I hope I can do justice to.
Yeah, that would be really interesting because it's altogether such an unusual topic. And the psyche of a woman criminal, and that also in the 18th or 19th century, when, you know,
It was
women were
difficult
so
to get material.
confined.
Yes, it was.
What could break them? Yeah, what could make them break through to become criminals? It would be interesting to know that. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Anushya.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Shamita. just wanted to say how strange, how it's all fallen together, Songjukta Di, don't you think? That the voice of the woman is quite strong. It sort of runs like a sutra right through all the books that have come up for discussion. And this wasn't planned by me. It just came to happen this way.
And yes, and we ended with women criminals.
Yes. All right, everyone. Just want to say a quick word of thanks to all our authors. Wishing you all the best. Shumita Banerjee, Songjukta Dasgupta, Pradeepan Banani Kakkar, as well as Paramita Mukherjee Malik. I would like to particularly gesture towards Dr. Uma Dasgupta, Ruma Sen, Afroz Randeria, Amita Chatterjee, Shutanuka Ghosh Roy, and all of you, you know, Arundhati Roy, who are here and who supported us today and so often. I look forward to inviting all of you to the 20th of July book club meet, which is going to be a very spectacular one, a different one, with Dr. Uma Dasgupta's seminal book on the history of Sriniketan. So all you Tagore lovers, all you lovers of Shantiniketan, please do join us. I'll make sure we send you the hyperlink so you can come. 20th of July is a date with all of you. Thank you again. It's been a great pleasure. This is the last hurrah by way of the book club with Mr. Ambarish Dasgupta, who is our president, and our incoming president, Mr. Kunal Sen, and the First Lady, Mrs. Ruma Sen, were both here. Thank you so much, everyone. Good night.
Good night.
Thank you, Julie. Thank you, Julie, for having us.
Thank you, good night.
Going to have to meet the July 20th.
Pleasure.
Yeah.
Good night.
I will have to miss July 20th, Julie,
Thank you so
as
much.
we're traveling back that day.
Okay. We'll send you the recording.